Hello friends, welcome to my YouTube channel, The Current Affairs Audiobooks. This channel has been created to provide updated info about various current affairs issues. Hello friends, today we'll have a look at the global energy crisis with specific reference to the Indian context. Let us have a look at the definition of an energy crisis. An energy crisis or energy shortage is any significant bottleneck in the supply of energy resources to an economy. A sustained energy crisis may become a humanitarian crisis. If an energy shortage is prolonged, a crisis management phase is enforced by authorities. What is the current global energy crisis? In recent times, various news of energy crisis has come up in both developed and developing nations. Major economies such as the US, China, Europe, and India are currently being affected by the global energy crisis. The current energy crisis is a disruption in the availability and supply of energy resources to large parts of the global economy amidst increasing demand. Let us have a look at the causes. There are varying reasons across jurisdictions which are contributing to the current crisis. The reasons for this power crunch are being stated by many experts as pandemic, greenflation, Russian invasion of Ukraine, geopolitics, and so on. Let us have a look at each of these individually. Coming on to the pandemic, the global economic recovery is well on course. The pandemic resulted in reduced global demand, which in turn limited their production. The unexpected recovery rate has led to a rapid increase in energy demands, causing sudden inflation. Prices of natural gas, oil, coal, and other energy resources hit multi-year highs. Climate change. Coal mining has become difficult in countries like India and China. The harsh European weather conditions adversely affect the gas transport systems. This leads to greenflation. A cold winter and hot summer, as well as an economic growth, has equated to electricity shortages. The demand for more sustainable sources of energy, like natural gas, has increased, causing price rise, further on causing greenflation. However, restrictions by governments on traditional energy sources due to environmental concerns has also led to the greenflation. Renewable sources require massive infrastructure and investments, which is delaying the output as well. Renewable sources are also unreliable in meeting the net energy demand. Also, renewable energy lacks storage solutions and cannot be fully depended upon. The Russian invasion. The global energy landscape and market has been massively reshaped by the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Russia's unprovoked invasion has had far-reaching impact on the global energy system, disrupting supply and demand patterns and fracturing long-standing relationships. It has pushed up energy prices and threatens to derail efforts of reducing global greenhouse emissions, which are produced due to fossil fuels. The disruption has thrown energy markets into turmoil and created major energy security and energy poverty risks worldwide today. Russia has limited its gas supply to Western Europe. Much of Europe mainly uses gas for heating. Increasing restrictions have been placed by governments on traditional energy sources. Governments are working towards encouraging renewable sources of energy to meet global emission targets. Before Russia's invasion as well, the world was far off from achieving its shared energy and climate goals. Global carbon dioxide emissions reached an all-time high in 2021 and fuel markets were already showing signs of strain. At the same time, investment in clean energy technologies has remained far below the levels that are needed to bring emissions down to net zero by mid-century. The OPEC, that is the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, has marginally increased its oil production. However, it is not sufficient in meeting expected future demand. The supply chain or logistic disruptions to supply of natural resources has further compounded the problem. How are the energy prices reacting to the crisis? Fossil fuels, which include coal, natural gas, and oil, still account for the vast majority of global energy needs. As demand outstrips supply, we are seeing an exponential rise in these commodity prices. The price of natural gas, oil, coal, and other energy sources has skyrocketed. How can the energy crisis affect inflation and the broader economy? Higher energy costs feed into higher inflation across a broad basket of items directly and indirectly, such as electricity, transportation, food, etc. Since energy prices affect economic decisions across the supply chain, the rise in prices has had a significant impact on economies, with many companies in Europe and Asia shutting down, unable to bear the high energy costs. The price of domestic natural gas in India has also risen in tandem with international prices. However, domestic coal prices, which are set by Coal India, have failed to rise. Thermal plants that run on imported coal have slashed imports due to rising prices, and this is expected to lead to a drop in power production. The global energy crisis is a result of a cascade of issues faced by different countries over the years. It has resultantly also affected global security. Global security has been rocked by at least four interwoven crises: high inflation, the energy crisis, food poverty, and the climate crisis. None of these problems have been solved. It also leads to global recession with a tremendous effect on climate action and global stability. Let us have a look at the energy crisis in India in specific. In April 2022, India witnessed acute power shortage due to unavailability of coal supplies, with more than 100 million units of energy shortage on 8 days over the course of a month. This forced distribution companies known as DISCOMs in several states to enforce load shedding, rolling blackouts to ration power. The overall power situation in the country remains precarious because of less availability of domestic coal. And if coal stocks in India's thermal power plants are not ramped up before the monsoon, there will be a repeat of the crisis that India saw in October 2021 and April 2022. The energy demand is further expected to rise. Not only will the irrigation load go up due to paddy cultivation in the season coming up, but domestic and industrial demand will also increase because of the hot and humid weather in June July. Besides, production in coal mines decreases during the monsoon season. Coal based power generation, with a capacity of around 210 gigawatts of the total 396 gigawatts, accounts for about 53% of India's total power capacity as on March 2022. India imports about 20% of its thermal coal requirements. The April crisis occurred because of lack of coordination between different stakeholders, that is, the power, coal, and rail ministries, state governments, distribution companies, and generation companies. Currently, the country's coal stocks are running abysmally low. India depends on fossil fuels for almost 70% of its power requirements. What can be the possible causes of the power crisis? There are a number of causes. Let us have a look at each of these. Firstly, revival of economic activities. The heat waves and revival of economic activities after COVID-19 disruptions propelled electricity demand. The jump from March to April 2022 was 6.5%, with the overall jump between April 2022 and April 2021 being 14.5% growth. The power consumption in many states like Tamil Nadu, Maharashtra, and Karnataka has risen from 14 to 21%, putting strain on the production and supply network. India imports most of its coal from outside, and the supply chain bottlenecks have still not smoothened post the pandemic. The widening gap between the low cost of electricity and the high prices of imported coal has further compounded the situation. Even after having the fourth largest coal reserves in the world, the local supplies have strained due to a drop in investment in fossil fuels to meet climate targets. Power companies did not stockpile coal due to the high costs of stockpiling. In 2016, India set an ambitious goal of reaching 175 gigawatts of renewable energy by 2022. As on April 2022, it had 95 gigawatts of energy from renewable energy sources. This implies a target slippage of about 51 gigawatts. India could have averted the power crisis if progress towards the 175 gigawatt renewable energy goal had been on track. The railways, which dominate long distance transport, are also facing high passenger traffic on shared tracks. The second reason is the inefficiency of thermal power plants. With thermal power plants running much below their capability, that is 59% of their capacity utilization, India could have managed this demand surge by ramping up thermal power generation. The thermal power plant's inability to ramp up power generation is explained by the critical coal stockpile levels at plant sites. While thermal power plants are required to maintain stockpiles approximating 2 to 3 weeks of fuel needs, more than 100 plants are operating with fuel stocks below 25% of the required level, and over half of these have stocks below 10%. A disproportionate share of generation comes from older inefficient plants, while the newer and efficient ones remain idle for want of favorable supply contracts or power purchase agreements. DISCOM losses. Despite 2 decades of sectoral reforms, the aggregate losses of DISCOMs stands at 21%. This is reflective of both operational inefficiency and poor recovery of dues from consumers, including those affiliated with state governments and municipal bodies. These losses are also the reason for DISCOMs not being able to pay the generators on time, resulting in payment delays to Coal India, which in turn is reluctant to supply coal on request. Multiple structural fault lines exist. Utilities do not undertake effective resource planning. Also, there has been a cash flow problem in the electricity sector. The inability of DISCOMs to recover costs has resulted in outstanding dues to power generation companies. Let us have a look at the complexity of the problem. As of May 2022, in 109 of India's 165 thermal power plants, which are currently operational, the actual coal stock varied between 0 to 24% of the normative level. The total normative stock that these 165 plants are required to keep is 65,442,000 tons. The pithead power stations have to keep a minimum of 15 days of coal stocks, while power stations located more than 1000 kilometers away from the coal mine, also called non-pithead stations, have to keep a minimum stock of 30 days. With domestic supplies unable to match the consumption, the center has been pushing states and GENCOs to import coal to run the imported coal-based plants. Of the 165 operational thermal power plants, 15 are designed on imported coal. The total installed capacity of these plants is 17,255 megawatts. As on May 2022, these plants had an annual stock of just 25% of the normative stock level. Imported coal is blended with domestic coal to the extent of 10% to ease the pressure on the domestic coal supply. In the light of the emergent situation, it is essential that imported coal-based plants run and the states import coal for blending as in the previous years. However, states have been reluctant to import coal because of the high cost despite several directives from the Power Ministry since last December. The Ministry of Power has issued directions under Section 11 of the Electricity Act that all the imported coal-based plants start running, and most of them have complied. However, the import of coal by states for blending is not satisfactory. Blending expensive imported coal with domestic coal is definitely going to impact the generation cost, and the impact to the retail consumer depends on the quantum of such power purchased by the distribution utilities. The state regulator has to give consent to purchase expensive power. While distribution companies do not want their liabilities swelling, they are wary of the trade-offs, that is, between buying expensive power and creating liabilities or resorting to optimal load shedding. Generators are also not paid on time and are wary of purchasing international coal, only to find that distribution companies won't offtake because they don't see consumer cash flows commensurate with the higher generation purchases. The center has been arm twisting states. With GENCOs reluctant to import, the Power Ministry decided to act tough. In a letter dated 18th May, it passed orders for import of coal for blending to be placed by 31st May and the coal to arrive by 15th of June. All defaulted GENCOs would have to import coal for blending purpose to the extent of 15% to meet the shortfall in the remaining period. up to 31st October 2022. The coal shortage resulted from policy lapses of the Government of India. Hence, the Power Ministry should take up the responsibility to import coal on a government to government basis and ensure that the imported coal is made available to the state GENCOs at the prevailing Coal India Limited rates. States protested that they should not be penalized for the policy lapses of the centre. The financial burden must not be loaded onto the states by way of high cost of imported coal. The government also did not have enough rakes to transport domestic coal from the pitheads to the power plants. At the beginning of May, power discoms owed Rs 97,688 crores to power gencos. States like Punjab, Delhi, and Tamil Nadu provide free electricity up to 200 to 300 units to consumers, leading to local governments paying the discoms for the revenue gap. Subsidies to consumers form up to 30% of the aggregate revenue of the power discoms. The maximum amount that power discoms owe to generation companies is in Tamil Nadu and Andhra Pradesh. The government also needs to address the huge aggregate technical and commercial losses of discoms. The result of all this is finding quick fix solutions to suppress the crisis rather than fixing structural fault lines. What can be the way forward at the national level? Planning and policy reforms. There is a need to change our planning from one of primarily managing scarcity to one of flexible resiliency. We also need to have a carrot and stick policy, that is, incentives to achieve or exceed compliance, but repercussions if they don't. Policy focus should be on long term structural solutions that address distribution financial viability and a robust mechanism for resource planning. There is a need to create an enabling ecosystem to ensure power plants work efficiently. With more than 90% of power being procured through long term contracts, discoms have little incentive to dynamically assess and manage demand. Discoms should be enabled to undertake smart assessment and management of demand. Revisiting fuel allocation and supporting the priority dispatch of efficient plants could help India reduce coal demand up to 6% of our annual requirement and set aside more coal for the times of crisis. Strategic energy transition. A knee jerk reaction to the current crisis may generate pressures to direct investments to fossil resources, risking India's long term energy transition efforts. A strategic approach to the energy transition that harnesses the low cost power promise of renewable energy and opportunities for diversification in energy mix is critical to address existing power shortages. Coming on to midterm solutions. While India is expected to tide over the current coal shortage, the only way it can secure its longer term energy security is by ramping up production from renewables. However, in the midterm, it is imperative to upgrade infrastructure at coal mining facilities and open up existing mines to the private sector for mining to augment the supply of coal. Failure to do so will leave it vulnerable to imbalances in supply and have deleterious effects on the overall economy. Focusing on domestic production and reducing imports is essential. Increasing domestic production to reduce and even imports altogether is imperative. The key enabler for this would be to dispense with the requirement for fresh environment clearance. India must enhance investments in the deployment of clean coal technologies through the coal value chain. Mining blocks can also be allotted to the private sector. By doing so, the requirement of higher coal imports and the consequent onerous financial burden would get moderated. What is the way forward at the global level? Governments need to focus on energy investments that look beyond the immediate term and are viable for the future. There is a requirement to prioritize measures bringing to a halt the energy crisis and provide greater energy security and sustainability. As an immediate solution to reduce the dependence on Russian fuel supplies, international governments need to replace the oil and gas from Russia with first oil and gas from other sources and then invest in other technologies. The international community needs to stick to global markets and find additional resources of power. Governments also need to make the most out of the existing oil and gas fields, shifting to shale oil and gas. The most suitable options for this are projects with short lead times and quick payback periods. This includes, for example, shale oil and gas, extending production from existing fields and making use of natural gas. Also, there is a requirement to identify new infrastructure and to facilitate the diversification of supply away from Russia. In the long term planning, governments need to lay emphasis on clean energy, renewables, energy efficiency, etc. Higher near term emissions have serious consequences for efforts to meet climate goals. They need to be compensated for through even greater emission reductions in the coming decades to remain within the stringent emission budgets required to reach net zero by 2050. Countries with capability need to focus on increasing nuclear energy production. The key solution to today's energy crisis and to get on track for net zero emissions is a dramatic scaling up of energy efficiency and clean energy. At the same time, to keep up with environment commitments, there is a requirement of reducing the amount of methane emissions from fossil fuel operations and ensuring that liquefied natural gas terminals are built to store ammonia or hydrogen in the future. To conclude, given the country's development aspirations, India's power demand is set to rise substantially and become even more variable. Increasing climatic and geopolitical uncertainties underscore the requirement to become more efficient in the way we generate, distribute, and consume energy. We need to act now for the long term resilience of India's power sector. The world is on an energy transition stage, and world economies dependent on thermal energy may find it difficult to switch to renewable energy sources of energy quickly. It is imperative to find sustainable alternatives. Climate change mitigation and tackling the energy crisis have to go hand in hand as both are complexly interlinked. Countries need to come up with solutions to control, mitigate, and balance the future with the present. To avoid future energy crisis, many countries are trying to strike a balancing act between green energy and fossil fuel usage. There is a need to successfully navigate out of the current crisis without adding any more problems in terms of sustainability and going green. Various initiatives have been introduced like solar powered batteries which are connected to the grid in California, Energy Island which is planned by Denmark, and the Green Grids initiative which has been planned by India. The world does not need to choose between solving the energy crisis and the climate crisis, and it cannot afford to ignore either of them. Collaboration and tackling the energy crisis needs to be done alongside action on issues such as rising cost of living as well as causing a grave humanitarian crisis. Energy supplies are likely to remain constrained. Producers are constrained to boost their output in response to higher prices. The worsening crunch will boost energy demand further. Price controls make things worse, affecting the incentive that producers possess to boost supplies as well as leading consumers to overuse energy and worsen shortages. Reluctance to raise the price of energy and subsequent electricity offers little incentive to boost production. The current requirements can have a backlash against renewable energy since reliance on traditional fossil fuels is not possible and governments may need to rethink their energy policy. With this, we have come to the end of our discussion on the global energy security crisis with specific reference to the Indian energy security scenario. Please do let me know if you would like to know more about current affairs topics in the comment section. If you like the content, please do like, share and subscribe to my channel. All the best. Jai Hind.